Does the right to keep and bear arms reduce crime rates in the United States? In the U.S., the Second Amendment explains that a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state, and the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. However, does this right actually reduce violence and guarantee safety? Some anti-gun movements, such as Brady, demonstrate that guns cause a lot of violence in the U.S. and affect a lot of people. Indeed, daily gun violence impacting people of all ages. Every day, 327 people are shot in the United States. Furthermore, if we take the annual gun violence, we see that every year, 117,345 people of all ages are shot, including 7,957 children and teens in the United States. Moreover, we can talk about mass shootings, which are one of the main factors behind a feeling of insecurity. In the United States, mass shootings are on the rise. There have been more than 560 mass shootings across the U.S. in 2023. According to the Gun Violence Archive, for each of the last 3 years there have been more than 600 mass shootings, almost 2 a day on average. Furthermore, let's talk about the effects of gun violence. Gun violence fractures families and communities. According to the Child Welfare League of America, more than 5% of America's children have witnessed a shooting. So this lead to a breach in the public health. In 2016, the American Medical Association adopted a formal policy calling gun violence a public health crisis because people who are impacted by gun violence may experience stress, depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. In addition, the population live in fear most of the time. According to a 2018 study by the Pew Research Center, the majority of U.S. teens fear a shooting could happen at their school, and most parents share their concern. So regarding this information, in a country where there are more guns than people, perhaps we can question the efficiency of the right to keep guns in order to decrease violence. The Second Amendment was not intended for managing crime, but rather for national defense of a free state by the well-regulated militia. Obviously, though, the more armed a populace is, the more those weapons will be used for violence. But that doesn't tell the whole story about crime as a whole. That said, increasingly firearmed societies, which systematically remove or mitigate restrictions on the situations in which firearms can be owned or used, absolutely contribute to more people being hurt or killed by firearms. You can find individual instances of a good guy with a gun stopping a bad guy with a gun, but as a whole, the more guns there are in a society, the more murders and suicides there will be. Nope. Gun violence is higher in areas where it's easier to get guns. The problem compounds when you consider that most of the states with loose gun laws have a high level of poverty. It's a recipe for disaster. And it's the reason the South dominates when it comes to gun violence. I mean, I would not be surprised if crime rates were lower, but that is not the only metric for crime. As a result of easy access to guns, U.S. crimes are more fatal, which is bad in its own right. It's difficult to compare crime rates across countries, each has its own legal system. And the U.S. tends to be very punitive, but it's eye-opening to compare murder rates between the U.S. and similarly economically developed countries, e.g. Europe. I don't think anyone can seriously contend that widespread gun ownership make the population safer in aggregate, but owning a gun may make an individual feel safer. And it doesn't feel like a right the country is going to give up soon. If I am not mistaken, 9 of the 10 states that have the highest crime rate also have very liberal gun laws. So the answer would be number. The best studies to date seem to show that stricter gun laws increase crime rates. especially violence against women. If you think about it, it makes sense. Gun laws are based on the premise that someone about to commit a felony will be deterred by an administrative violation. Criminals are not deterred by laws. So do you want the good guys armed or defenseless? Well, it certainly increases gun crimes and gun fatalities. Most of those folks being gunned down ain't committing crimes. So can't imagine any way in which it lowers crime rates. Scalia's infantile interpretation of 2A has caused hundreds of thousands of deaths. We'll never know for sure. Because when a firearm is used successfully in self-defense, it is not publicized by the mainstream media except perhaps for Fox. NPR won't do a story from the perspective of a gun owner. Only from the perspective of a victim of a mass shooting. NPR and CNN and MSNBC won't even do stories from the perspective of a victim of urban gun violence. Unless the victim is shot by a police officer. Like anything, it's complicated. There are two Americas impacted here. The majority of gun violence happens to and from inner city gangs. If there weren't inner city gangs, our gun violence rates would be very low. The reality is that if we governed the entire country by the measures it would take to kneecap inner city gangs, we'd be living essentially in a totalitarian regime. That's not to say they won't do it. Constant patrols, monitoring of online behavior, making cash illegal and banning guns, from a policy perspective, would probably work. Is that what you want? Yes, sir. I truly believe we need to strengthen our mental health system. Mandatory inpatient stays in some cases. Get our schools, colleges and universities back to teaching our kids stuff they can actually use to get a job as. Hospitals are rated for quality. So should schools get unions out of school system. Teach gun handling young and what it can do, both positive and negative. The adage guns don't kill people. People kill people is so very true. Put a loaded gun on a table. It only has the ability to kill if the wrong person uses it. Change my mind. Since this is a serious sub, I'm going to try to answer seriously. No. Hell no. Lulz. The US is the most dangerous developed nation in the world. It has the highest murder rate and violent crime rate. It's not even close to most developed nations. And is closer to places like Syria than Japan. So no. Guns don't do anything to reduce crime rate. I know that your post agrees with me. But I couldn't help but chuckle at the title. No. Guns are a right to self-preservation. You don't remove rights just to decrease violence. That isn't the solution. I think crime rate is less affected by gun prevalence than crime severity. Similarly, suicide rate is also less affected by gun prevalence than suicide success rate. Moreover, we can talk about mass shootings, which are one of the main factors behind a feeling of insecurity. In the United States, those mass shootings are largely in urban environments. If you're not in those areas, there's very little risk, which means that many, if not most, of us experience very little insecurity over them. Gun violence, like most crime, is overwhelmingly concentrated in a small number of zip codes. When Dems have 38 states in 20-ish years, they will fix the Second Amendment, a la UK and Australia. I'd say that free access to guns is the only thing that keeps US crime rates near manageable. The fact is we have so many guns that even if we banned guns, we wouldn't suddenly get European-level crime rate. BC, there are simply way more guns that are easily accessible in the US. Europe doesn't have almost 2 guns per person or something like that.